Hello, everybody, and welcome to History Slash Law Bite number 260, dated May 22nd, 2021. I'm Walter, your mobile historian and blue-collar scholar. This History Slash Law Bite is entitled President Woodrow Wilson's Supreme Court Appointments. Woodrow Wilson served as the 28th President of the United States of America from March 4th, 1913 to March 4th, 1921. And Wilson, a Democrat, managed to appoint 3 individuals to the Supreme Court during his 2 terms in the White House. For the record, all of his vacancies occurred during his first term in the presidency. Okay? So, in naming 3 men to the U.S. Supreme Court, Wilson replaced the following jurists. First, Justice Horace Lurton, who had been appointed to the court in 1909 by President William Howard Taft, Wilson's immediate predecessor in the White House, by the way. Lurton served for 5 undistinguishable years on the Supreme Court until his death in 1914. Next, Wilson was able to replace Justice Joseph Lamar. Like Lurton, Lamar had been appointed to the court by President William Howard Taft in 1910, and also had served 6 undistinguishable years on the U.S. Supreme Court until his death in 1916. And last but not least, Wilson was able to replace Associate Justice Charles Evans Hughes. Hughes resigned from the Supreme Court in 1916 to accept the Republican nomination for President of the United States. All right? Hughes would, of course, go on to lose the 1916 presidential election to Democrat Woodrow Wilson, but all was not lost for Hughes, as he would be reappointed to the court in 1930 by President Herbert Hoover, this time, however, as its Chief Justice. So Hughes made out quite all right. All right? So let's discuss the 3 men that President Woodrow Wilson appointed to the Supreme Court. His first opportunity at a vacancy, like I said, came with the death of Justice Horace Lurton in 1914. To fill this vacancy, Wilson would nominate none other than his Attorney General James Clark Mcreynolds. Wilson nominated Mcreynolds for the vacancy for very specific reasons, folks. First, he believed Mcreynolds to be a solid progressive. Ha ha! Not so much. And next, he described his working relationship with Mcreynolds to be very difficult. So to kind of get him out of the way, he bumped him up to the Supreme Court, where he would definitely and permanently be out of the way, rather than firing him. I think he would have been better off just firing him, but whatever, that's my opinion. So, Wilson nominated Mcreynolds to the Supreme Court August 19th, 1914, and Mcreynolds was confirmed 10 days later by a 44-6 vote in the U.S. Senate. All right. Yes, that's a short time, but guess what, folks? These long, protracted Supreme Court battles weren't always a way of life as they are now, okay? Back in the day, 100 years ago, Supreme Court nominations were often voted on the same day the president sent them to the Senate. So a Supreme Court nomination rarely lasted more than about a week, 2 at most. And if it lasted that long, the Senate must have just been very busy and had to get to that nomination later on. But most of the time, Supreme Court nominations were up and down and taken care of very quickly. What you see today and how they can often take months is a modern phenomenon. That's not the way it's always been, all right? And that is because the Supreme Court has essentially made itself the ultimate decision maker for all policy-related questions. So when you have that, that's what you get. Anyway, so serving as a Supreme Court justice for the next 27 years, James Clark Mcreynolds, woo boy, was a doozy, to say the least. First of all, the guy was anything but a progressive. He was a very reactionary, not just conservative, but reactionary individual who was exceptionally and openly racist, sexist, and anti-Semitic. Okay? He refused to sit on the bench while female attorneys argued. When black attorneys argued before the court, he would turn his chair around, effectively refusing to look at them and probably paying very little attention to their arguments. All right? And he refused to talk to his colleague, Justice Louis Brandeis, for the first 3 years they served together. Deep. Mcreynolds was an exceptionally disrespectful, rude, grouchy, cantankerous, and difficult man, to say the very least. Chief Justice William Howard Taft remarked that Mcreynolds took pleasure in making others uncomfortable. Indeed, Mcreynolds refused to allow others to smoke or drink in his presence. And he was so inflexible about certain things that quite often he would not budge unless he had his way. So like I said, the guy was very difficult to be around, very difficult to work with. I don't think he had any true friends in this life, and his servants could barely tolerate him. All right. He once, when he was getting his hair cut by the Supreme Court barber, told the barber, referred to Howard as a quote-unquote nigger university. He told the barber, I believe you all have N University here in Washington. And the barber replied, chastised Mcreynolds, saying that, he was exceptionally offended that a sitting justice of the Supreme Court would refer to a school as an N University. And the barber refused to finish cutting his hair. So, Mcreynolds was a piece of work, folks. He was one of the most inhospitable and lack of proper decorum oriented people to ever sit on the Supreme Court. Total lack of proper judicial temperament is what I was trying to say. And just very difficult, and just not someone who should have been on the Supreme Court. Okay? Now, as you would expect with people like Mcreynolds, he also had a flip side. Okay? He was also known to be very gracious and charitable as a host, offering them cigarettes, offering his guests drinks. Remember, he didn't like being around smokers and drinkers, so where'd that come from? The guy acts like he was kind of bipolar, truth be told. I'm just saying. And, he especially had a great love for the welfare of children, donating large amounts of money to children in Great Britain during the Blitz, the London Blitz in 1940. So beneath that grouchy and evil and cantankerous shell that he personified was obviously a very big heart in certain other circumstances. And, I guess that Mcreynolds proves the point that there's two sides to every person, and how much of the good side you see, of course, depends on the person, Then, like I said, as a reactionary on the Supreme Court, he almost always supported, the rights of corporations and the ability to, and furthering moneyed interests rather than the people. He did, however, occasionally break ranks and sided with personal rights in landmark cases such as Meyer versus Nebraska in 1923 and Pierce versus Society of Sisters in 1925. All right, Mcreynolds, forgive me for I keep saying Wilson. Mcreynolds was known as one of the four horsemen who opposed Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal from beginning to end. All right, they viewed the enlargement of the federal government as wholeheartedly unconstitutional during the 1930s and consistently voted against Roosevelt's New Deal legislation. Okay? So Justice Mcreynolds would tender his resignation to President Franklin D. Roosevelt in January of 1941, and he was seated on the court by Justice James Burns, who was a lot like Mcreynolds with the racism. All right. Mcreynolds died in August 1946 at the age of 84, leaving a sizable fortune to charity. At the time of his death, not a single member of the court would attend his funeral. However, when one of his black servants died in 1953, several members of the court attended his funeral. Shows you how much that servant was loved and how much Mcreynolds was disliked. So that's his first appointment, Justice James Mcreynolds. Mcreynolds, for the record, if I didn't mention it, served on the court from 1914 to 1941. 27 years. 27 years of being a difficult grouch, all right? So that takes us to Wilson's second appointment, which came with the death of Justice Joseph Lamar in 1916, all right? To fill the Lamar vacancy, Wilson would nominate a personal friend and a man who he had come to admire, love, and trust with virtually any area of policy and reform. That man was none other than attorney Louis Dimbits Brandeis. I know you've heard that name before. Louis Brandeis, at the time of his nomination, was one of the most well-known labor lawyers and progressive champions in America. All right? Brandeis had amassed a considerable fortune, taking on, various labor causes. All right? And he was, because of that, one of the most loved and one of the most vilified men in the country, definitely championed and greatly admired by progressives, but loathed by corporate interests and corporate power in general. Wilson had befriended Brandeis, and Brandeis had significantly contributed to Wilson being elected to the presidency in 1912. And, he had wanted to put Brandeis in his cabinet, but, Wilson realized there would have been a lot of opposition to that, given, Brandeis' perceived radicalism. Brandeis was viewed, as the arch enemy of corporate power in America. Big businesses, trusts, the banks, the railroads. Brandeis was viewed as the ultimate enemy of this. And the progressive movement, of which Brandeis was certainly, one of its leading forces, sought to take down these corporate giants, all right, and bring them under heavy regulation. So, they didn't want anything to do with Louis Brandeis, all right? So, when Wilson decided to nominate Brandeis to the Supreme Court in January of 1916, you could say this was one of the Supreme Court's earliest shitstorms of confirmation hearings. All right, you think the Kavanaugh hearings were bad? You think the Thomas hearings were bad? Not like the Brandeis hearings. There was so much controversy over Louis Brandeis' nomination to the Supreme Court that for the first time in its history, the Senate Judiciary Committee held public hearings on this nomination. All right, accepting testimony for and against Brandeis' nomination to the Supreme Court. As I've stated before, he was the arch enemy of corporate power, and corporate interests lined up one by one against him. All right. One of the most prominent conservative voices against him was former President William Howard Taft, who spoke of Brandeis as dangerous. All right. Dangerous to what? The ability of moneyed interests to control the country and treat everybody else like garbage? Do tell, Mr. President, and later Mr. Chief Justice. Brandeis was also opposed by conservatives in the legal profession, including the American Bar Association, did not view him to be Supreme Court material. All right, and this is one of the greatest justices in history. And the American Bar Association has to live with that they opposed one of the greatest justices in history. All right. Before he, of course, assumed that title. The people's lawyer, Louis Brandeis, certainly had an enormous record which spoke for itself. And believe me, there was enough, just as much, if not more, support for his nomination than there were detractors, all right? He had won the landmark Mueller versus Oregon case in 1908, largely due to the massive amount of evidence supported with his Brandeis brief, which, if you don't know what that is, but I'm sure you've heard of it, is a legal brief that contains usually dozens and dozens of pages of scientific facts and social data, and maybe about 2 or 3 pages of law. All right. But the bottom line is the brief is overwhelmingly supported with scientific data and evidence and social statistics, rather, more so than law. Law is there, but it's not very much of it. Most of it is scientific data and social statistics to support, the petitioner or the respondent's position in that particular case. And that's exactly what Brandeis did, all right? Ultimately winning the case of Mueller versus Oregon, all right? So after several months of, essentially confirmation battles, though Brandeis himself never appeared here to speak in his own behalf, just supporters and detractors. The first ever Jewish nominee to the Supreme Court and first ever Jewish justice to sit on the Supreme Court of the United States was confirmed on June 1st, 1916 by a 47-22 vote. All right, thus Louis Brandeis became the Supreme Court's first Jewish justice. Many more would follow, all right? During the court, Brandeis was one of its most consistently progressive members, all right? He remained firmly committed to the causes of liberalism and stayed on the side of the little man, the persecuted, the downtrodden, the poor, the weak, the impoverished, all right? Rarely did he ever side with the government, the strong man, the police, the powerful, Some of his most famous periods on the court came in dissent, however, especially his dissent in Olmstead versus United States, wiretapping case in 1928, all right? Now, even though he was on the court, Brandeis continued to work behind the scenes politically, serving as an advisor to many New Deal initiatives spearheaded by President Franklin Roosevelt. And, many of his former, students and colleagues went on to work in the Roosevelt administration and holding other high government jobs during the Roosevelt presidency. All right. Like I said, Brandeis was certainly, politically active guy and remained doing so. He didn't let being on the Supreme Court stop him from making suggestions and giving policy advice, as he had done to Wilson, before he got put on the Supreme Court. All right. Brandeis is known for his rather contentious relationship with Justice James Clark Mcreynolds. Like I said, the two didn't speak at all during, their first 3 years together on the Supreme Court, and presumably after that only spoke when they absolutely had to. Like I said, Mcreynolds was very anti-Semitic, and, Brandeis wasn't here for the drama and ignored Mcreynolds as much as possible. Like Mcreynolds, however, he refused to move his office into the new Supreme Court building when it opened in 1935, instead preferring to continue working out of his apartment at home, all right? As he got up in age and began to decline in health, Justice Louis Brandeis, after 23 years of distinguished service on the Supreme Court, submitted his retirement to President Franklin D. Roosevelt in February of 1939. He would be succeeded on the court in April of 1939 by the legendary Justice William Orville Douglas. All right. Justice Brandeis passed away on October 5th, 1941 at the age of 84. So that's Wilson's second appointment, Justice Louis Dembitz Brandeis. All right. The court's first Jewish justice in history. Last but not least, we come to Wilson's third appointment, Justice John H. Clark. All right. Clark's appointment, of course, came about with the resignation of Associate Justice Charles Evans Hughes, who of course left to run for president in 1916. A good and a bad move, ultimately. All right. So to fill this vacancy, Wilson, at the suggestion of Attorney General, Wilson, at the suggestion of Justice James Clark Mcreynolds, and ironically some others, appointed Clark, who was then serving as a district court judge in Ohio, to the Supreme Court. Now, Wilson himself had appointed Clark to the district court 2 years earlier and knew him to be a solid, committed progressive and thought he would be a very good Supreme Court justice. Now, Clark himself didn't exactly care for appellate judicial work. He much more preferred trial work over appellate work. Believe me, there is a difference. But he, figured that this was a great honor, and so he went along with it and accepted that nomination. Okay? So he was nominated in July of 1916, and July 14th of 1916, and was confirmed roughly about 9 days later in 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. So roughly around July 23rd to 25th. If I recall correctly, it was between 9 and 12 days later. So between July 23rd and 25th, he was confirmed to the Supreme Court little over a week after his nomination in 1916. Okay. Now, Clark, as I stated, he didn't really care for appellate work. So, he hated the process of hearing oral arguments and the conferences and having to bend his opinions to accommodate colleagues. He enjoyed being a trial judge where it was just him and his decision was all that mattered, okay? Not 8 other people, okay? It's a lot to have to accommodate 8 other people. Just try going on a road trip with 8 other people and you'll see what I mean. Okay? So Clark's days on the court were not very enjoyable for him. And, but on the court, he did make some friendships, including Justices Holmes, Day, Van Devanter, Brandeis. He was an unwavering progressive on the court, and often found himself voting with Holmes and Brandeis on most issues. There was a lot of animosity with Mcreynolds, but who didn't have animosity with Mcreynolds? And, he strongly supported federal and state power over industry to no end. All right. He was one of the most liberal members of the Supreme Court. Now, one of his most famous opinions probably is Abrams versus United States, First Amendment case rejecting, First Amendment protection for individuals who I believe were burning their, inciting opposition to the draft. All right. Selective service case, recalling correctly, but that was one of his most famous opinions that drew dissent from Holmes and Brandeis. These two normally stuck together, all right? And certainly were not in agreement with Clark's opinion in Abrams. But I had to check something, and Abrams was actually focused on seditionist speech, all right? Theoretically advocating the overthrow of the government, okay? I'm thinking of Schenck versus United States, which was selective service case, all right, that dealt with individuals wanting to speak out and obstruct the selective service system. Okay, different matter altogether. All right, but in any case, that was his most famous opinion, Abrams versus United States. All right, 1919. Okay, so with that, Clark never really had much of an opportunity to establish a broad and powerful effect on jurisprudence in many areas because, like I said, he just wasn't happy, and his sisters had recently passed away, both of them, and continuing feuding with Mcreynolds led him to step down from the Supreme Court after just 5 years on the bench in September of 1922. All right, and he would be succeeded on the court by Justice George Sutherland. Justice Clark would continue to remain politically active in various liberal causes. You know, he was a broad supporter of the New Deal in the 1930s, and like I said, continued to be a very vibrant and outspoken member of the Democratic Party until his death in March of 1945 at the age of 87. Okay, so that completes Woodrow Wilson's 3 appointments to the Supreme Court of the United States. Justice James Clark Mcreynolds, who was appointed in 1914 and served until 1941. Justice Louis D. Brandeis, who was appointed in 1916 and served until 1939. And Justice John Clark, who was appointed in 1916 and served until 1922. Any questions or controversies, leave them down below and I'll be happy to answer them. If you enjoyed this video and learned a thing or two from it, drop me a like. I'd graciously appreciate it. And if you dare, and I hope you do, if you've not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do so now. I mean, that means more than anything, folks. Just hit that little red subscribe button right there and we will be in business. I appreciate you so much for listening. If you've made it this far, that means you are very much into the history of the Supreme Court just as much as I am. All right? So take care, stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you at the next bite. Have a good day.